A courtroom is a place of judgment, but for Olivia Hayes, it was a theater of humiliation. 8 months pregnant and newly widowed, she stood clutching her belly, a fortress of black wool against a world that had crumbled. She was there to secure the future of her unborn child, the last piece of her beloved husband. But across the aisle, a woman named Sophia Monroe sat, her own subtle swell hidden beneath a silk dress, a triumphant smile gracing her lips. She was the mistress, the secret that had bled out after Daniel's death. And in that cold, silent room, as 2 unborn babies became pawns in a war for a dead man's fortune, no one could have prepared for the truth. A simple piece of paper held a DNA report that would not just end the battle, but burn the very memory of the man they both thought they knew to the ground. The air in the Suffolk County probate and family court was stale thick with the ghosts of 1,000 fractured families. It smelled of old paper floor polish and the faint metallic tang of unshed tears. For Olivia Hayes, each breath was a struggle, a conscious effort to draw this dead air into lungs that felt bruised from the inside. The black maternity dress she wore was simple, elegant, and suffocating. It felt less like clothing and more like a shroud, a constant reminder of the 2 things that now defined her widowhood and impending motherhood. Her hand rested protectively over the tight drum of her stomach, a familiar reflexive gesture that had become her only source of comfort in the 3 months since Daniel's death. The baby, their baby, was a restless flutter beneath her palm, a tiny, insistent life, oblivious to the cold war being waged in its name. This child was supposed to be the triumphant 3rd act of their love story, the culmination of years of quiet yearning and hushed, hopeful whispers in the dark. Now it felt like the last flickering candle in a hurricane. Daniel. His image was seared behind her eyelids. The easy crinkle of his eyes when he smiled, the solid warmth of his hand in hers, the low timbre of his voice promising her forever. He had been her world, the architect of her happiness. A successful real estate developer, Daniel Hayes, had built skyscrapers that touched the Boston skyline. But for Olivia, his greatest creation was the safe, beautiful life he had built for them in their Beacon Hill brownstone. It was a life of quiet charity galas, autumn walks through the public garden, and the shared, simple dream of a child to fill their home with laughter. His death, a sudden brutal heart attack at 42, hadn't just broken her heart. It had shattered the very foundations of her reality. Across the polished oak aisle, a different reality was taking shape. Sophia Monroe sat with an unnerving poise, her back ramrod straight. She was the kind of woman who commanded attention without demanding it. Sleek blonde hair cut in a severe but stylish bob, a cream-colored silk blouse that whispered of wealth, and eyes the color of a winter sky, cool and assessing. There was a faint swell to her abdomen as well, perhaps 4 or 5 months along, a fact that she didn't try to hide, but rather presented as a piece of irrefutable evidence. She was the other woman, the secret. Olivia had learned of Sophia's existence from a letter delivered by a messenger the day after Daniel's funeral. It was written on thick, expensive stationery, the words clinically cruel. Sophia introduced herself as Daniel's true partner, not just in business. She was a senior VP in his company, but in life. She claimed their affair had been ongoing for 2 years, and that Daniel had been on the verge of leaving Olivia. The baby she carried, she wrote, was the proof of their love, the heir he truly wanted. The letter had been a second more vicious death. Olivia had crumpled it, her body racked with a nausea that had nothing to do with her pregnancy. Denial was a flimsy shield, and it had been shattered by the mountain of evidence Sophia's lawyer, the slick and predatory Garrett Thorne, had since presented: emails, hotel receipts, even a draft of a new will unsigned but damningly clear in its intent to provide for Sophia and her child. Now, in the solemn quiet of courtroom 4B, they were facing each other for the first time. Sophia's gaze met Olivia's, and a small, knowing smile touched her lips. It wasn't a smile of malice, but something far worse: pity. It was the smile of a victor, of someone who knew the game was already won. In that smile, Olivia saw her entire marriage rewritten as a lie, her love story demoted to a pitiable delusion. The grief that had been a constant heavy cloak around her shoulders ignited into a cold, hard flame of anger. She would not break. Not here, not in front of her. Her lawyer, Arthur Vance, a man whose stony demeanor and old-world gravitas seemed carved from the same granite as the courthouse steps, shifted beside her. He was a friend of her father's, a man of few words, but immense presence. He had taken her case without hesitation, his expression a mixture of paternal concern and legal fury. "Stay focused, Olivia," he murmured, his voice a low rumble. "Let Thorne do the talking. Let them show their hand." The Honorable Judge Eleanor Davies entered a formidable woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense air that seemed to suck any remaining warmth from the room. She surveyed the scene before her, the heavily pregnant widow, pale and trembling, the impeccably dressed mistress radiating confidence, and the two opposing lawyers circling each other like wary predators. "We are here today," Judge Davies began, her voice crisp and clear, "to hear the preliminary arguments regarding the contest of the last will and testament of Daniel Robert Hayes. Mr. Thorne, your client is the petitioner. The floor is yours." Garrett Thorne rose a shark in a tailored suit. He was handsome in a way that felt untrustworthy, his smile too bright, his gestures too smooth. "Your Honor, thank you. This is a simple matter, albeit a tragic one. My client, Ms. Sophia Monroe, was the long-term partner of the deceased. They were deeply in love, building a life and a business together. Mr. Hayes's untimely passing occurred just before he could formalize his intentions to divorce his wife, Mrs. Hayes, and amend his will to reflect his true family." He gestured towards Sophia, who placed a hand on her belly, a perfectly timed piece of theater. "That family, Your Honor, includes the unborn son he was so excited to welcome into the world. We are here to ensure that Mr. Hayes's true heir is not denied his birthright by an outdated document that no longer reflected the reality of his life." Arthur Vance remained seated, his face impassive. He had warned Olivia this would be Thorne's strategy, paint her as the obsolete wife, a relic of a past Daniel had already discarded. Every word was a poisoned dart, and Olivia felt them land, each one piercing the fragile armor she had constructed around her heart. She squeezed her eyes shut, trying to picture Daniel's face, trying to hear his voice, telling her he loved her. But the image was blurry now, tainted by the confident pronouncements of the man across the room. Thorne continued, his voice dripping with synthetic sympathy. "We have evidence emails, sworn affidavits from colleagues that Mr. Hayes was a man torn, but a man who had made his choice. His legacy, his company, his estate. It belongs to the future he was building with Ms. Monroe. To deny her and his son their rightful share would be a profound injustice, a perversion of his final wishes." The word son echoed in the silent room. Sophia was having a boy. Daniel had always wanted a son. They had even picked out a name, Samuel. Was Sophia's child now to be Samuel? The thought was a physical blow, and Olivia gasped a small, choked sound. Sophia's cool eyes flickered towards her again. The smile was gone, replaced by a look of detached triumph. She had him, that look said. She had his love, his time, his secrets, and now she would have his legacy. Olivia felt the fight drain out of her, replaced by a vast, empty despair. For a moment she believed them. Daniel, her gentle, steadfast Daniel, had lived a double life. She was the fool, the naive wife, left to clutch a belly full of lies. Then she felt it again. A kick. Strong and definite. A tiny life pushing against her, a reminder of a promise made in the quiet of their bedroom, a promise of a future. Her future. Her child's future. The despair receded, and the cold flame of anger returned, burning brighter than before. She straightened her back, lifted her chin, and met Sophia's gaze. There was no hatred in her eyes, no fear. There was only the unyielding resolve of a mother. This was not just about a will or an estate. This was about the truth. And she would fight for it, no matter how ugly it turned out to be. "Mr. Vance," Judge Davies said, her gaze shifting to their side of the courtroom. "Your response." Arthur Vance rose to his feet, not with the theatrical flourish of Garrett Thorne, but with the slow, deliberate gravity of a man who knows the weight of his words. He was tall and broad-shouldered, and his dark conservative suit seemed to absorb the light around him, making him an anchor of sobriety in the swirling currents of drama. "Your Honor," he began, his voice calm, and measured a stark contrast to Thorne's impassioned rhetoric. "What Mr. Thorne describes is a compelling work of fiction, a tale of secret love and thwarted intentions conveniently spun after the only man who could refute it is no longer with us. The facts, however, tell a very different story." He picked up a document from his table. "This is the last will and testament of Daniel Robert Hayes, executed on January 12th of this year. It was drafted by my firm, signed by Mr. Hayes, and witnessed by 2 of my partners. It is legally ironclad." He paused, letting the weight of that statement settle in the room. Sophia Monroe's serene composure wavered for a fraction of a second, her fingers tightening on her designer handbag. Vance continued. "The will is not complicated. It is the simple, direct, and loving final instruction of a devoted husband. It names his wife, my client, Mrs. Olivia Hayes, as the sole executor and primary beneficiary of his entire estate. It specifies that should they be blessed with children, his estate would be placed in a trust for her and for any and all issue born of their legal union." He enunciated the last words with deliberate precision, "born of their legal union." Garrett Thorne was on his feet in an instant. "Objection, counsel is attempting to use semantics to disinherit a child of the deceased. The law in Massachusetts is clear. A child born out of wedlock has inheritance rights." "I am not a student of semantics, Mr. Thorne," Vance replied, his voice dropping to a dangerously quiet level. "I am a student of the law, and the law respects the clear, unambiguous intent of the testator. Daniel Hayes's intent was to provide for his wife and the child they were expecting together. There is no mention of Ms. Monroe. There is no mention of any other potential offspring. There is only Olivia Hayes. Judge Davies held up a hand. Mr. Thorne, sit down. Mr. Vance, continue. Vance nodded. Your Honor, the petitioner's entire case rests on a flimsy narrative supported by a handful of curated emails and an unsigned document that holds no legal authority. A draft is just that, a draft. A thought, an idea, not a legal directive. For all we know, Mr. Hayes reviewed that draft and rejected it, content with the will he had already established, the will that protected his wife and their family. He turned his gaze slowly, deliberately from the judge to Sophia Monroe. Ms. Monroe was an employee of the deceased. A senior vice president, yes. A trusted colleague, perhaps. But her claim to be his true partner is a self-serving fantasy designed for one purpose: to seize the assets of a man who can no longer defend his choices or his marriage. Sophia gasped, a theatrical sound of pure indignation. That's a lie. He loved me. He was trapped in a loveless marriage. Order. Judge Davies's voice cracked like a whip. Ms. Monroe, you will be silent, or you will be removed from my courtroom. Is that understood? Sophia flushed, a splotchy red creeping up her neck. She shot a venomous glare at Olivia before forcing herself to nod, sinking back into her chair. Thorne, ever the performer, stepped in to smooth things over. My apologies, Your Honor. My client is overwrought. It is deeply painful for her to hear the love of her life's memory being besmirched in this manner. He then turned to Vance. You speak of facts, Mr. Vance. Well, here is a fact for you. My client is pregnant. We have medical records, sonograms, and we have a sworn affidavit from Ms. Monroe that Daniel Hayes is the father, the only possible father. He let that hang in the air, the central unavoidable truth. 2 pregnant women, 1 dead man. A sworn affidavit, Vance repeated, his tone laced with skepticism, is a piece of paper with a signature. It is a claim, not a fact. The only fact here is that we have 2 competing claims to paternity. Then let's resolve it, Thorne shot back, sensing an opening. We welcome a DNA test. We demand it. Let science prove what my client has been saying all along. Let's establish the paternity of both unborn children. We are confident that the results will show that Mr. Hayes is the father of Ms. Monroe's son. A murmur went through the small public gallery. This was the moment the drama had been building towards. Olivia felt her blood run cold. A DNA test. Of course. It was inevitable. But the clinical finality of it, the idea of her baby's most intimate biological truth being exposed and debated in this sterile room, felt like a violation. She looked at Arthur Vance, her eyes pleading. Vance's expression was unreadable. He had discussed this possibility with her. He had told her it was the only way forward. He addressed the judge. Your Honor, while we find the petitioner's claims to be baseless and opportunistic, we do not object to a court-ordered paternity test. The truth is the best defense against fiction. We are fully confident that a DNA comparison will validate Mrs. Hayes's position and expose Ms. Monroe's claim for the fraud that it is. His confidence was a balm on Olivia's raw nerves. He truly believed Sophia was lying. He truly believed Daniel had been faithful. For the first time in weeks, a tiny sliver of hope penetrated her despair. What if Arthur was right? What if this was all a monstrous, calculated lie? Judge Davies nodded her face, set like stone. Very well. The court orders that non-invasive prenatal paternity tests be conducted for both Mrs. Olivia Hayes and Ms. Sophia Monroe. A DNA sample from the deceased Daniel Hayes will be provided by the medical examiner's office. The tests will be performed by an independent court-appointed laboratory, Boston Forensic Specialists. The results will be delivered directly and exclusively to this court under seal. Is that agreeable to both parties? It is your honor, Vance said firmly. Enthusiastically your honor, Thorne added with a smug smile. This hearing is adjourned until the results are available. I expect that will be in approximately 2 to 3 weeks. We will reconvene at that time. The judge struck her gavel, the sharp crack echoing the breaking of Olivia's world. As people began to file out, Garrett Thorne approached their table, his shark's smile firmly in place. Sophia trailed behind him, a silent, triumphant shadow. Mr. Vance, Mrs. Hayes. Thorne began, his voice oozing insincere cordiality. I do hope you'll prepare for the inevitable. It would be so much less messy for everyone if you were to agree to a fair settlement now. Acknowledge Daniel's son provide for his future. It's what Daniel would have wanted. Before Vance could respond, Olivia spoke, her voice low, but shockingly steady. The only thing my husband would have wanted, Mr. Thorne, is for you and your client to stop desecrating his memory with these lies. Thorne's smile faltered. He looked at Olivia, truly looked at her, and for a moment the mask slipped. He hadn't expected her to have any fight left. He had underestimated her. Sophia stepped forward, her cool eyes locking with Olivia's. Lies, she whispered, her voice a venomous caress. Oh, you poor thing. You have no idea what lies you were living in. He pitied you. He told me so. He said you were fragile. He stayed with you out of guilt, not love. My baby isn't a lie. He's the truth. And the truth is going to take everything from you. Every word was designed to wound, to break her spirit before the battle had even truly begun. Olivia felt the sting sharp and deep, but she held Sophia's gaze, refusing to look away. The kick came again, a little drumbeat of support from within. Arthur Vance stepped between them, a granite wall. That's enough. If you have anything further to say, Mr. Thorne, you can say it to me in a formal deposition. Stay away from my client. Thorne steered Sophia away, but she looked back over her shoulder, her lips curled into that same maddeningly confident smile. As they walked out of the courtroom, Olivia watched them go, the mistress and her lawyer, a portrait of absolute certainty. They had no doubt the DNA would prove them right. And as the courtroom doors swung shut behind them, a terrifying thought wormed its way into Olivia's mind. What if their confidence wasn't a bluff? What if Daniel really was the father of Sophia's child? The sliver of hope that had appeared moments before was extinguished, leaving her in a darkness more profound than ever. The Beacon Hill brownstone felt less like a home and more like a museum of a life that was no longer hers. Every object held an echo of Daniel. The worn leather armchair in the study where he'd read the Wall Street Journal every morning, the faint scent of his cedar and bergamot aftershave that still clung to the towels in their bathroom, the half-finished crossword puzzle still on the kitchen counter, his familiar scrawl in the little boxes. For the first few weeks after his death, these echoes had been a comfort. Now they were instruments of torture. Each memory was now tainted with a question mark. When he said he was working late, was he with her? When he bought her flowers, for no reason, was it out of love or guilt? The entire 8-year tapestry of their marriage had begun to unravel, thread by painful thread. The days leading up to the DNA test were a special kind of hell. Time stretched and warped each hour, an eternity of waiting. Olivia drifted through the silent rooms of her home, a ghost haunting her own life. Sleep offered no escape, her dreams filled with distorted images of courtroom benches and smiling, faceless women. She'd wake with a gasp, her heart pounding, her hand flying to her belly to make sure the baby was still there, still real. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, unable to bear the oppressive silence any longer, she found herself in the nursery. It was almost finished. They had painted it a soft, neutral shade of sage green. A beautiful oak crib, the one Daniel had spent an entire Saturday assembling, with painstaking care, stood against the far wall. Tiny, impossibly small clothes were neatly folded in the dresser drawers. It was a room brimming with hope and love. Or it had been. She ran her hand over the smooth rail of the crib, her fingers tracing the wood grain. She remembered the day it was delivered. Daniel had been so excited, his usual serious demeanor replaced by a boyish glee. "It's getting real, Liv," he'd said, his arms wrapping around her from behind, his hands joining hers on her stomach. "He's going to be here soon. Our son." They hadn't known the gender for sure, but Daniel had been convinced it was a boy. A little boy to carry on the Hayes name. A legacy. He'd talked about teaching him to sail on the Charles River, about taking him to his first Red Sox game at Fenway Park. His dreams for this child had been so vivid, so heartfelt. Could a man capable of such genuine love and excitement for one child be simultaneously creating another with a different woman? The two Daniels couldn't coexist in her mind. One of them had to be a lie. Her fingers brushed against a small, silver-plated rattle on the changing table. A gift from Daniel's parents sent from their retirement home in Florida. The thought of them sent a fresh wave of pain through her. They adored her. They had been devastated by Daniel's death, and the news of the will contestation had utterly bewildered them. They called her every day, their frail voices filled with worry, assuring her that this Sophia Monroe must be a gold-digging charlatan, that their son loved only her. She wanted to believe them, she desperately wanted to, but their faith in their son couldn't erase the images now burned into her mind. The infertility struggle had been their secret shadow. For 2 years they had navigated the emotionally brutal landscape of doctor's appointments, invasive tests, and crushing disappointments. It was Daniel's issue, a low sperm count, that made natural conception nearly impossible. The diagnosis had hit him hard. He was a man used to success, to bending the world to his will. Infertility was a failure. He couldn't fix a problem. He couldn't outsmart. Olivia had watched him retreat into himself for a time, a quiet shame shadowing his eyes. But then he had emerged from it with a renewed sense of purpose. "We'll find a way, Liv," he had sworn to her one night. "Whatever it takes. We're a team." They had decided on in vitro fertilization, using an anonymous donor. It was a difficult decision, particularly for Daniel, who was so proud of his family line. He had mourned the loss of a biological connection, but he had masked his disappointment for her sake, focusing instead on the joy of simply becoming a father. He had pored over donor profiles with her, helping her choose a man with a similar physical profile and a clean bill of health. He had held her hand through every injection, every procedure, celebrating with tears in his eyes when the doctor finally confirmed the pregnancy. How could that man, the man who had weathered that storm with her, have been having an affair? And if he was, why would he be trying to have a baby with another woman when he knew he was infertile? It made no sense. Unless Sophia Monroe was lying about Daniel being the father. It was the only explanation that allowed Olivia to keep some semblance of the man she loved intact. It had to be a lie. Her phone buzzed, startling her out of her reverie. It was Arthur Vance. "Olivia," he said, his voice its usual steady baritone. "Just checking in. How are you holding up?" "I'm trying, Arthur," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "This house, it feels so empty. I know this is difficult. The waiting is the hardest part, but I need you to stay strong. We submitted our samples to the lab this morning. The process has begun." She sank onto the rocking chair in the corner of the nursery. "Arthur, what if she's telling the truth? What if the DNA comes back and he's the father?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. Arthur Vance was not a man given to false reassurances. "Olivia," he said finally, his voice careful, "based on the medical information you shared with me regarding Daniel's infertility, the chances of him fathering a child naturally are, as his doctor stated, virtually zero. For Ms. Monroe's claim to be true, she would have to be the 1-in-a-million miracle that you and Daniel prayed for, but never received. It seems improbable." "Improbable, but not impossible," she pressed. "Little in life is impossible," he conceded. "But in a court of law, we deal with probability, and the probability is overwhelmingly in your favor. Thorne and his client are running a bluff, a very cruel and very public one. They are counting on you to break, to settle, to give them a piece of the estate, just to make them go away. You must not." His words were logical. They made sense, but her fear was not logical. It was a primal, gut-wrenching terror. "I found something," Vance said, his tone shifting. "Something in Daniel's financials that I think you should know about." Olivia's heart leaped into her throat. "What is it?" For the past 3 years, Daniel has been making a monthly payment of $5,000 to an account under the name LH Holdings. The payments are regular, consistent, and they stopped the month he died. LH Holdings, I've never heard of it. Was it a business expense? It doesn't appear to be, Vance said. The account is registered to a private individual, not a corporation. I'm running a check on the name now. It's probably nothing. A private investment, perhaps. But in a case like this, there are no loose ends. I'm looking into everything. LH Holdings. The initials meant nothing to her. It was just one more secret in a life she was discovering was full of them. As she hung up the phone, the brownstone seemed to press in on her, its silence no longer empty, but filled with whispers, with questions she was terrified to answer. She looked at the perfect, hopeful nursery, and for the first time, she wondered if she would be raising her child in this house at all. This house built by a man who was becoming more of a stranger with each passing day. Arthur Vance was a man who believed in due diligence, a principle that had been drilled into him over 40 years of practicing law. It meant leaving no stone unturned, no matter how small or insignificant it seemed. The monthly $5,000 payments were a loose thread, and Vance's instinct was to pull it until the whole tapestry either tightened or unraveled. The trace on LH Holdings came back faster than he expected. It was not a corporation, but a simple sole proprietorship linked to a bank account in Pittsfield in the heart of the Berkshire Mountains. The account holder's name was Leo Hayes. The name hit Vance like a physical jolt. Hayes. He ran it through every database he had access to. A birth certificate surfaced first from Mercy Hospital in Boston. Leo Michael Hayes. Father Robert Hayes. Mother Eleanor Hayes. The same parents as Daniel Robert Hayes. Daniel had a brother. In all his years of knowing the Hayes family, in all the conversations with Olivia, in all the legal documents he had drafted for Daniel, the existence of a sibling had never once been mentioned. It was a ghost, a complete unknown. He dug deeper. There was a smattering of public records, a high school diploma from a boarding school in New Hampshire, a couple of speeding tickets in his early 20s, a registration for a decade-old Ford pickup truck. There was no social media presence, no digital footprint to speak of. Leo Hayes seemed to be a man living deliberately off the grid. The only recent address was a P.O. box in a small rural town called West Stockbridge. Without telling Olivia he didn't want to give her a new phantom to worry about, Until he knew what it was, Vance got in his car the next morning and drove west. The city gave way to suburbs, then to the rolling hills and dense forests of the Berkshires. It felt like driving into another world, a quieter, slower place, a world away from the cutthroat pressures of Boston real estate and probate court battles. He found Leo Hayes living in a small, weathered cabin at the end of a long gravel road. It was set on a few acres of wooded land, a curl of smoke rising from a stone chimney. A large, well-tended vegetable garden sat to one side, and stacks of firewood were piled neatly against the cabin wall. The Ford pickup was parked nearby. It was the picture of rustic solitude. Vance parked his sedan and walked up the stone path to the front door. Before he could knock, the door opened. The man who stood there was both a stranger and instantly familiar. He was leaner than Daniel, his face weathered by the sun and creased with lines that his older brother hadn't had. His hair was a darker shade of brown and longer pulled back in a short tail, and his eyes were a startlingly intense blue. But the bone structure, the shape of his jaw, the set of his mouth, it was Daniel. A wilder, unvarnished version. "Can I help you?" Leo Hayes asked. His voice was rougher than Daniel's with a cautious edge. "Mr. Hayes, Mr. Leo Hayes," Vance asked, extending a hand. "My name is Arthur Vance. I'm an attorney from Boston. I was your brother's lawyer." Leo looked at the outstretched hand but didn't take it. His eyes narrowed. "Was. So you know he's dead?" It wasn't a question. "Yes. I'm representing his wife Olivia in the matter of his estate." A flicker of something annoyance pain crossed Leo's face. "The estate. Of course. That's what it always comes down to, isn't it? Look, Mr. Vance, I don't know why you're here. Daniel and we haven't been brothers in 20 years. Whatever mess he left behind, it has nothing to do with me." He made to close the door, but Vance put a hand on it. "He was sending you money, Mr. Hayes. $5,000 a month. For 3 years. Leo froze. The cautious edge in his eyes sharpened into hostility. "That was a private arrangement. It was a debt. He owed me." "A debt for what?" Vance pressed gently. "None of your damn business," Leo snapped. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. The gesture was so uncannily like Daniel's it was startling. "Look, I'm sorry he's dead. No one should die that young. But my brother and I walked different paths a long time ago. He chose his, I chose mine. There's nothing I can tell you that will help you or his wife." "His wife, Olivia, she's pregnant," Vance said quietly. "She's expecting their first child." This time the reaction was different. The hostility in Leo's eyes softened, replaced by a deep, complicated sadness. He stared out past Vance at the trees, his jaw working silently. "Pregnant," he repeated the word, sounding foreign on his tongue. He finally looked at Vance again. "Good. I'm glad to hear that. He always wanted to be a father." There was a universe of unspoken history in that simple sentence. "There's a complication," Vance continued, deciding to lay out the bare facts. "A woman has come forward, a business associate of Daniel's. She's also pregnant, and she claims Daniel is the father. She's contesting the will." Leo let out a short, bitter laugh. "Of course there is. With Danny, there was always a complication. He built his whole life on them." "Olivia never knew he had a brother," Vance stated, watching the man's reaction closely. Leo's gaze hardened again. "That was his choice. He was good at building walls, my brother. Good at compartmentalizing. He built a wall between us a long time ago." "Why?" Leo was silent for a long moment, studying Vance as if trying to decide how much to reveal. "We had a falling out. Over the family business, over our father, over everything. Daniel was the golden boy, the one who followed the path. I was the screw-up, the one who walked away. He bought out my share of the inheritance our father left us. He thought money could solve everything. That's what those payments were about. The final installments. It was a plausible story, but it felt incomplete. The emotion simmering beneath Leo's tough exterior was too raw for a simple business disagreement, even a bitter one. "Mr. Hayes," Vance said, his voice earnest. "His widow is fighting for her future, for her child's future. She's up against a woman who seems utterly convinced that a DNA test will prove her claim. But Olivia and Daniel struggled with infertility for years. It was a diagnosed medical issue. Daniel was told he could likely never have a child naturally. So you see my confusion. One of these stories is a lie. And I have a feeling you might know something that could help me figure out which one it is." Leo stared at him, his blue eyes churning with an internal conflict. He seemed to be weighing 2 decades of resentment against a flicker of some other, older emotion. Loyalty, pity, regret. "The man you knew, Mr. Vance," Leo said finally, his voice low and heavy with meaning. "The one who built skyscrapers and went to charity balls. That was just one version of him. There were others. Be careful which one you go looking for. You might not like what you find." He stepped back and closed the door, leaving Arthur Vance standing on the stone path with more questions than answers. As Vance drove back towards Boston, the image of Leo Hayes was burned into his mind. The resemblance was striking, but the differences were profound. Daniel had been polished steel. Leo was raw iron. Vance knew with a certainty that settled deep in his bones that the $5,000 a month was not for an old inheritance. It was for something else, something current, something secret. And he had a dreadful premonition that this secret was intricately, dangerously woven into the fabric of the battle that was about to reach its climax in a Boston courtroom. Leo Hayes wasn't a ghost from Daniel's past. He was a key to its present. The 3 weeks crawled by for Olivia like a sentence of hard labor. Each day was a mountain to be climbed, each night a valley of fear to be navigated. The brownstone grew more oppressive, the echoes of Daniel more mocking. She finally packed a small bag and moved into the guest room of Arthur Vance's home, where his kind, quiet wife, Eleanor, fussed over her with tea and sympathy, creating a small pocket of peace in the raging storm of Olivia's life. The day they were to reconvene in court dawned gray and ominous, a low, bruised sky hanging over Boston. As Olivia dressed, her fingers fumbled with the buttons on her simple black dress. Her reflection in the mirror was a stranger's, a pale, haunted woman with dark circles under her eyes, her body distorted by the late stage of pregnancy. She looked fragile, broken. But when she placed a hand on her belly, she felt a surge of strength. She was not just Olivia anymore. She was a mother, a protector, a warrior, whether she felt like one or not. The atmosphere in courtroom 4B was even more electric than before. The public gallery was fuller a sign that the gossip columns had caught wind of the salacious Hayes estate battle. The air crackled with anticipation. Sophia Monroe was already there, seated beside Garrett Thorne. Today she wore a striking crimson dress that accentuated her own pregnancy. It was a power color, a statement of defiance and victory. She looked radiant, refreshed, and utterly certain. When she saw Olivia enter, her lips curved into that familiar, infuriatingly serene smile. She looked from Olivia's swollen belly to her own, then back to Olivia's face, an unspoken message passing between them. We are connected by him, but only one of us was his future. Olivia took her seat next to Arthur Vance, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. Vance gave her hand a brief, firm squeeze. Deep breaths, Olivia. We stand by the truth, whatever it is." His words were meant to be comforting, but they chilled her. Whatever it is. Even he, her stalwart defender, was preparing for a truth she might not want to hear. Judge Davies entered, and a hush fell over the room. Her face was, as always, an impassive mask. She held a single thick manila envelope in her hand. The seal of the Boston forensic specialists was stamped across the flap in bold red ink. "We are here to review the results of the court-ordered paternity tests," the judge announced, her voice cutting through the tension. "The lab has delivered the report to me this morning. I have it here, and I have not yet reviewed its contents." She placed the envelope on the bench before her, her hand resting on it. The room seemed to shrink. All the air sucked towards that single, innocuous-looking paper object. It held everything: Olivia's future, her child's identity, the final verdict on her marriage. "Before I unseal this," Judge Davies said, her sharp eyes sweeping across the two legal teams, "I want to make it clear. The findings within this report will be considered definitive evidence by this court in determining the question of heirship as it pertains to the will of Daniel Hayes. The court's decision based on these results will be binding. Do both parties understand and accept this?" "We do, Your Honor," Vance said, his voice a solid rock. "We do, Your Honor." Thorne echoed, a triumphant gleam in his eyes. Olivia's heart was a wild drum against her ribs. She could hear the blood rushing in her ears. This was it, the moment of truth. She risked a glance at Sophia. The other woman was staring at the envelope on the judge's bench with an almost hungry intensity. Her confidence was absolute. And in that moment, Olivia knew with a sickening certainty that Daniel had betrayed her. The DNA would show he was the father of Sophia's child. Her perfect marriage was a lie. Her husband was a cheat. She would have to share his legacy, his memory, his name with this woman and her child for the rest of her life. A wave of dizziness washed over her. She gripped the edge of the table to steady herself. Vance glanced at her, his brow furrowed with concern. She shook her head slightly, forcing herself to stay upright to witness the final destruction of her world. She owed it to her child to see this through, to be standing at the end, no matter how painful the fall. Judge Davies picked up a letter opener, the metallic slide, as she broke the seal, deafeningly loud in the silent room. She pulled out a multi-page document, her eyes scanning the first page. Olivia held her breath. The entire courtroom seemed to have stopped breathing with her. Time slowed to a crawl. The judge's expression did not change. Not a flicker of an eyebrow, not a tightening of the lips. She was a perfect, judicial sphinx. She read for what felt like an eternity, her gaze moving from one line to the next. Finally, she looked up, her eyes first, finding Arthur Vance, then Garrett Thorne. "The report is unusual," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "It contains two separate analyses, one for each unborn child compared against the decedent's sample." She cleared her throat. "Mr. Vance, as the representative for the estate and the beneficiary named in the existing will, I will have you read the findings aloud to the court." She handed the document down to the bailiff, who carried it over to their table. The bailiff placed it in front of Arthur Vance. Olivia stared at the papers as if they were a venomous snake. The top page was a dense block of text and numbers full of terms like allele frequencies and genetic markers. Garrett Thorne leaned forward in his chair, a smug smirk plastered on his face. This was his moment of triumph. He had won. Sophia Monroe sat back, a picture of vindication, one hand resting possessively on her stomach. Arthur Vance put on his reading glasses, his movements slow and deliberate. He picked up the report. Olivia watched his face, searching for any hint, any sign of what was to come. But his expression was as unreadable as the judge's. He took a deep breath, and the world held its. He began to read. This document, Arthur Vance began, his voice a calm anchor in the turbulent courtroom, is the paternity test report from Boston. Forensic Specialist's case number 734B regarding the estate of Daniel Robert Hayes. He adjusted his glasses, his gaze fixed on the page. Olivia felt her entire world narrow to the space between those words and his mouth. Across the aisle, Sophia Monroe leaned forward slightly, a portrait of smug anticipation. The report is in 2 parts, Vance continued. Part 1 concerns the fetus carried by Mrs. Olivia Hayes. The analysis compared the fetal DNA profile with the DNA profile of the decedent Daniel Robert Hayes. The results are as follows. Daniel Robert Hayes is excluded as the biological father of the fetus. A collective gasp filled the room. The words hit Olivia like a physical force stealing the air from her lungs. Excluded. Impossible. A mistake. She looked at Vance in sheer panic, her mind scrambling for an explanation. Sophia's triumphant smile widened a cruel, sharp slash across her face. This was better than she had hoped. However, Vance's voice boomed, silencing the rising murmur. The report contains a further note. It reads, while the decedent is excluded as the father, the fetal DNA shows a significant number of shared genetic markers consistent with a close biological relationship. The probability of an avuncular relationship, that of a biological uncle, is 99.999%. Confusion rippled through the courtroom. An Uncle Daniel was an only child. Vance ignored the commotion, turning to the second page. Part 2 concerns the fetus carried by Ms. Sophia Monroe. Sophia's eyes gleamed. This was her coronation. The analysis. Vance read his voice hard, as Steele concludes that Daniel Robert Hayes is also excluded as the biological father of the fetus. Sophia Monroe's victorious smile froze, then shattered. What? She choked out her voice, a strangled whisper. No, that's impossible. They made a mistake. I'm not finished, Ms. Monroe, Vance said, his cold gaze pinning her to her seat. The report continues. As with the first test, the fetal DNA shows a significant number of shared genetic markers with the decedent. The genetic profile of the biological father is identical to the biological father in the first test. The probability of an avuncular relationship to the decedent is 99.999%. Vance lowered the paper, the silence in the room now absolute and electric. Your Honor, he announced, the report concludes that both unborn children were fathered by the same man, and that man was the biological brother of Daniel Hayes. Chaos erupted. He doesn't have a brother, Sophia shrieked, her composure utterly gone. He was an only child. This is a trick. It is no trick, Ms. Monroe, Vance thundered. Daniel Hayes did have a brother, a younger brother named Leo Hayes, a brother he was estranged from, a brother he kept hidden from his polished Boston life, a brother he had been paying $5,000 a month for the last 3 years. He turned to Olivia, his eyes softening with pity. Olivia, Daniel couldn't bear the thought of the Hayes family line ending. When you decided to use a sperm donor, he couldn't accept a stranger. So he went to Leo. He asked him to be your anonymous donor, paid him for his service and his silence. He lied to you because he wanted you to believe the child was in some small way still his. The baby you are carrying is Daniel's nephew." The truth landed with devastating force. Then Vance rounded on Sophia, his face a mask of contempt. "And you, Ms. Monroe, your scheme was as audacious as it was vile. You discovered Daniel's infertility and his secret brother. You sought Leo out, seduced him, and planned to pass his child off as Daniel's gambling the family resemblance would be enough. A perfect, diabolical plan." He let the accusation hang in the air as Sophia's face crumbled into a mask of horror. She had been exposed in the most spectacular way possible. "Your Honor," Vance concluded, "Ms. Monroe's petition is based on fraud. The will provides for issue born of their legal union. Mrs. Hayes's child conceived through a fertility process within that union is the sole qualifying heir." Sophia let out a terrible guttural sob of defeat. The judge's gavel came down the sharp crack, sealing her fate. "The petition is denied." The aftermath was a quiet, devastating storm. Sophia Monroe's disgrace was swift and total, but for Olivia, the legal victory offered no comfort. She was left to grapple with her late husband's true betrayal, not infidelity, but a profound deception about the very origins of their child, an act of pride that had shattered her reality. Her love for Daniel was now irrevocably tangled with this deep, painful wound. A week later, Arthur Vance arranged a meeting in the Boston Public Library courtyard. Across the table sat Leo Hayes, his face a painful echo of his brother's. He confessed the whole story, how Daniel had begged him to be the anonymous donor to keep the bloodline pure, paying for his silence. He recounted his brief, calculated seduction by Sophia, revealing how they had both been pawns in different games. Staring at the stranger who was her son's biological father, Olivia made a decision. The cycle of secrets would end with her. She told Leo that her son deserved to know his father, to know the truth, a better, more honest truth than the one she had been given. The path forward was uncertain, tangled with the existence of her son's half-sibling. But as Olivia left the courtyard, she was no longer just a widow mourning a flawed man. She was a mother ready to build a new legacy from the ashes of the old one, founded not on lies, but on resilience and a difficult, honest dawn. The gavel falls. A courtroom drama ends. But the story of a life is just beginning. Olivia walked away, not with the perfect life she thought she had, but with a harsh and complicated truth. Betrayal came from all sides, from the husband she adored and the stranger who coveted her life. Yet in the ashes of those lies, she found her own strength, not as a wife or a widow, but as a mother prepared to build a new world for her son, based on the one thing she had been denied, the truth. This story shows that the deepest secrets always find their way to the light, and sometimes the most painful endings are the start of a journey toward who we were always meant to be. What would you have done in Olivia's position? Could you ever forgive such a profound deception from your husband, or the calculated cruelty of the other woman? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of shocking secrets and a mother's incredible resilience moved you, please give this video a thumbs up. Share it with someone who loves a dramatic tale. And don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories that will leave you speechless.